So a good, what are we now? Good afternoon by 5 minutes. My name is Bjarke Ingels. I'm an architect, and I'm going to try to find a way to not show anyone my backside too much. I want to start the day with a Danish lesson. This word, formgivning, is the Danish word for design. And as the name suggests, it literally means to give form, because to design something is to give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, to give form to the future. Just to give you a few examples, 2 decades ago, our first project was we designed the Copenhagen harbor bath that extended the life of the city into the water around it. And on the opening day, when the Copenhageners were jumping into the port, we were realizing that a clean port is not only great for the fish, it's also much more enjoyable for the lives of the people that live in that city. And we thought maybe this is a bigger idea, and we called it hedonistic sustainability. The idea that the sustainable city or the sustainable building is not only better for the environment, it can also be much more enjoyable for the people that live in it. And over the last 2 decades, we've been pursuing this idea of hedonistic sustainability. Here you see the Copenhill. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's so clean that the steam that comes out of the chimney is cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So to celebrate this invisible marvel of modern engineering, we turned the facade of the power plant into the tallest climbing wall in the world. So if you have a certain set of skills, you can climb the actual facade. It's 100 meters tall. If you're too afraid to climb the facade, you can take the elevator inside and admire all the technology that filters the particles from the air and scrubs the CO2, and reach the roof where you'll find a mountain meadow. Denmark is a country entirely without mountains, except for this one. And here the Copenhageners can hike, they can enjoy the view, and they can do alpine skiing. Denmark won 0 medals in Sochi and in Beijing at the Winter Olympics. And we hope we may be able to change this one day, because now the Copenhageners can actually practice at home on the top of a power plant that converts the waste of the city into energy and district heating. In a way, you can say that Copenhill is a good example of the power, the transformational power of form giving. My son is just turning 4 in 2 weeks. Him and his entire generation, they don't know that there was a time when we didn't ski on the roof of the power plant that turned the waste into energy. So for him and his whole generation, that's the new normal. That's the baseline. So when they sit down and try to give form to ideas for their future, that's where they begin. And I think in that sense, we have an incredible power as form givers. Then fast forward to March 2020. Like the rest of the world, our office went entirely remote because of the pandemic. Except our model workshop, we learned that we actually had the laser printers and the tools we make architectural models with. We could use those tools to provide emergency medical equipment for the local healthcare providers. We managed to manufacture 25,000 ventilator tubes and face shields in the first 6 weeks, until the supply chain could catch up. And we thought, wow, so our company somehow had the skills and the tools to address one of the biggest problems on Earth at that time. We thought, is there another big problem we can address? And we thought, instead of going down in scale, we could move up in scale. And we thought, what if we apply our methodology as architects and planners to make a plan for the entire planet? And how do you start such a plan? Well, we decided to start with a number, 173,000 terawatt hours per year. That's the total amount of energy that all of humanity spends in 1 year. And if you look back 200 years, for the last 200 years, we've been, in the beginning, we were burning only coal, and then we found, only wood, and then we found coal, oil, and gas. And even today, renewables is a very small part of our energy source. But this incredible access to energy that came with fossil fuels has created one of the greatest explosions in quality of life. And if you measure it on, for instance, life expectancy, you can see on all continents, it has created this incredible explosion of welfare. But it also has the side effect that each year we are emitting 50 billion tons of CO2. As a solid block of coal, it would be 2 by 2 by 2 kilometers. That's Manhattan next to it. And of course, every year we add another one and another one. They create a layer in the atmosphere that traps heat and is slowly cooking our planet. So the greenhouse gas emissions come from basically 4 gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and F gases. And they come from a series of human activities. So to make a simple framework for this plan for the planet, we decided to divide all of our activities into sort of 5 verticals: transportation, energy, industry, food, and waste. And these are the main sources for greenhouse gases and climate change. But also another 5 verticals that are unrelated to climate change, but are still essential for sustainable human presence on Earth. You have biodiversity, health, pollution, habitation, and water. So in the interest of time, I'll only focus on greenhouse gases, but then also what problem are we planning for? We have 7.7 billion today. We will be 10 billion in 2050, and we should all have access to the same high quality of life. So we took Denmark as a benchmark. So if all 10 billion have the same quality of life as Denmark, this is the amount of energy we spend. And then we thought, to make it simple, why don't we boil it down to the scale of a single earthling? So here's 100 earthlings. You can fit 1 million earthlings on 1 square kilometer. And if all of Earth would go to a giant Woodstock music festival, we could fit on 100 by 100 kilometers. But we thought instead, what if we divide all of Earth into 10 billion equal shares? Then each one of you would have at your disposal 225 by 225 meters. 2/3 will be oceans, 1/10 will be uninhabitable, mountains and glaciers. And if you look at the habitable land, it's a hectare. Roughly half is nature, and the other half is pretty much agriculture with a little bit of city. And this is where all our problems come from. So if we start looking at energy, 3/4 of our emissions come from the manufacturing of energy, and we use energy to power our buildings, our transportation, and our industry. All of these sectors can currently, with existing technologies, be electrified, so we can provide their energy with renewables. Again, today, each of you, your equal share in all of Earth's energy consumption is coming from this much oil, this much coal, and this much gas. If you would replace it with renewables, you would need this much wind power and this much solar power combined. And if we should all have the same energy consumption of Denmark, it would be a little more like this. We would have to store the energy in batteries and hydrogen. Hydrogen can be made with electrolysis, and you can use it to create fertilizer, building materials, but also fuel cells and green fuels. We already started converting the half of the transportation sector, which is cars, to batteries. But if we would try to power a Boeing 747 with batteries, the battery pack would weigh 15,000 tons, making it very difficult to fly. So there's a series of sectors that require hydrogen as an energy source. If we look at industry, some consumption comes from electricity, but some of the consumption comes from the chemical processes in the industry. For instance, when you burn limestone to create concrete, you emit CO2 into the atmosphere. So if we change to more sustainable materials, for instance, if you convert a building, 1 ton of concrete in a building into 1 ton of timber, you reduce the carbon footprint with 2 tons of CO2. Then, of course, there's everything that we throw out. A lot of our materials we can recycle, like metals, glass, different kinds of building materials. But the organic waste is difficult to recycle. But instead of putting it on landfill, we can turn it into biogas and use it as an energy source instead of having gas leak into the atmosphere. Biomethane has the same properties as natural gas, but coming from a waste resource, it will be carbon neutral. And then we have the biggest footprint, which is where we make all our food. Rice fields and cattle emit methane when we fertilize our fields, and when we sort of burn our crops, we emit nitrous oxides into the atmosphere. And then every year we expand our agricultural land with 1 square meter per person, and that of course emits CO2 from roots and from deforestation. Then you can see in the corner, those 2 fields, it's the same amount of area we use to produce food for humans. That's crops we make only for energy. We can replace that amount of agriculture with solar panels much more effectively. Instead of burning our crop residue, we can gasify it, use it as a resource. Instead of leaving our land fallow, we can have cattle graze it and fertilize it and reduce our footprint. And that leaves us to the sort of elephant in the room, or the cow. A cow and a calf needs 2 hectares of grassland to be able to eat. And the burps from a cow emit 100 kilos of methane per year, the equivalent of 108 tons of CO2. So you need 1 fully grown tree per ton of CO2, but they perfectly fit on 2 hectares of grassland. And it just turns out that cows love trees. Silvopasture, which is the combination of grassland and forestry, is the natural habitat for large herbivores. So finally, when you look at grain production, over the last 50 years, the land used for cereals has remained the same, but the output has more than doubled. So if we convert all of Earth to the highest, most efficient yield practices, we can actually reduce the footprint of the average Earthling from this much to this much. And if you add the necessary energy production from wind and solar, and you can even combine solar with agriculture or windmills with farmland, you can make it even smaller. So you can see, compared to the available footprint per Earthling, we can actually solve a carbon-neutral, sustainable human presence on Earth within the resources we have. If we applied to the 5.5 million people that live in Denmark, this is how much we need. All Americans can be sustained sustainably with this much area, and this would be for all of Earth. And of course, a plan like this needs to be implemented at different scales. We need to sort of electrify our homes so we can power them with renewable energy. We need to upgrade our envelopes and build with sustainable materials. We need to harvest the locally available energy. To move between our buildings, we can move with a whole array of electric forms of mobility. We need to sort of convert our waste into a resource. We need to harvest the energy from the wind and the sun to power our industry and transportation. We need to convert to the most efficient form of agriculture to free up land, to increase the biodiversity around our cities and allow the trees from the forest to capture the CO2 that we still emit. And then essentially at all scales, we need to make these adjustments, but using only existing technologies and existing practices. So we still need to answer one last question. What do we do when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining? And you can see that the wind loads are quite irregular over the year and over the month. But our energy consumption is pretty stable. So we can simply harvest the peak loads and save them for later when we need them. But it will take time to generate such an enormous capacity of energy storage. So today we actually move energy around in the form of pipelines of gas and oil, and we ship coal. If we take our UK location and we connect it to more locations via the electric grid around Europe, you can see that the greater connectivity a grid has, the more resilient and stable it becomes. So what would be the impact of a global power grid? Essentially, if you take, this is the solar output from London over a year, and you can see a peak around the northern summer. If you connect it to Cape Town, you can see the opposite picture, a dip around the southern winter. So the seasonal variations would spell each other out if you connect them. Similar, if you connect to the east and west, you can see as you travel around the day, there's always peak sun somewhere on Earth. So essentially, a global grid would allow us to power our winter with our summers by connecting the north to the south, and power our nights with our days by connecting the east to the west. They should have played it. It was the world will be as one with John Lennon. But essentially, you can say that to implement such a plan requires, of course, technical skills and influence and resources way beyond what we can do at an architecture company. But what I can see has happened is that it has given us a clarity and an awareness that we didn't have before. And we have started aligning our projects with the principles of the Plan for the Planet, almost like a North Star. And just to give you a few examples, this is the most sustainable factory in the world that we just opened in Norway. It's made from locally sourced timber, powered with local hydropower and photovoltaics. So not only making it an incredibly beautiful factory, but also making it entirely carbon neutral. In Zurich, we're building the new main airport terminal, entirely covered in photovoltaics. It will be the largest timber building in the world, 3 times bigger than the current biggest timber building, but also making the arrival to Zurich a real joy and pleasure. In California, we co-founded a company called Neighbor, where we're using productization and technology to create carbon-neutral homes for multifamilies, starting with these 3 buildings in San Jose. For Johns Hopkins, we're collecting all of the student activities in this solar-covered timber village that makes the building carbon neutral and self-sufficient when it comes to energy. In Milan, we are creating a new work environment as a gateway to a new neighborhood that's covered by the largest solar canopy that also becomes a shelter for the public life of the city. And in Sevilla, for the European Commission, we are creating a public square and the Joint Research Center for the European Union, where the square is shaded from the Sevilla sun, also allowing us to produce twice as much power as the building consumes. We recently presented it at the Vatican, and if you ever have to visit the Pope and you wonder what to give him, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, gave him a framed photo of this project. And maybe lastly, we just finished the headquarters for Google in Silicon Valley, where this kind of floating canopy of dragon scales are actually entirely covered in photovoltaics, powering the workspace for 3,000 Googlers. So essentially all examples of how our sustainable future can not only be more sustainable, but also more enjoyable to work in and more beautiful to live in. Maybe to end, as an architect, it's very rare that you can have an impact at a planetary scale. But because of our work with the Plan for the Planet, we started working with Misk, the shipping company. Every 5th container in the world has the 7-pointed star on it. And they've committed to converting their entire fleet to be powered with methanol or ammoniac supplied from renewable energy. So they want to convert all of their ports into green growth hubs, where harvesting local energy, you can not only power their own fleet, but also the port and the city. You can create sustainable agriculture. You can create carbon neutral steel. So essentially every port that Maersk will be touching will become a catalyst to accelerate the energy transformation. We've started with the port of Tangier in Morocco, also moving towards the port of Aqaba in Jordan. And essentially because Maersk is a global spanning company, each port that they touch will become a sort of a transformational element in the energy transition. When you look at the carbon footprint of Maersk, they have 2 times the carbon footprint of all of Denmark. So if you can turn Maersk carbon neutral, it will in fact have an impact at a planetary scale. So maybe to round up, and also because of the capacity of people and resources in this room, what could be the purpose of making this plan for the planet at a greater detail? And the way it has influenced my own thinking and the thinking of my organization and the thinking of an organization like Maersk, I think it can do that to others. So today, when we want to know something, we Google it and we see what it says. If we want to know more about it, we go to Wikipedia and see what it says. What if Plan for the Planet could be an online, crowd-funded, crowdsourced resource that if you get elected mayor in a small town, or if you become the chief supply chain officer of a company, you can go to Plan for the Planet and you can sort of download tangible, actionable actions that you can take, companies that you can connect with to play your part in the energy transition. And we have just started setting up the framework for this Plan for the Planet. So if there's anyone in here who feels motivated to contribute with knowledge or technology or funds, please don't hesitate to visit us and reach out. Because I think the real lesson is that with the power of form giving as human beings, not only do we have the possibility, we actually have the responsibility to dare to give form to a plan for our planet. Thank you.